Hello, everyone. GM. Welcome back to another episode of Overpriced JPEGs. I am so excited for today's conversation. This is a convo I've been wanting to have for quite some time now, which is to really dive deep on what is happening with crypto, with NFTs in Asia, but also specifically in Hong Kong, where I feel like there's a lot of buzz right now. So today I am sitting down with Gary Liu. He is Hong Kong based. He is the co-founder and CEO of Terminal 3, which is a Web3 data company. He is the chair of Web3 Harbor, which is Hong Kong's Web3 association. And he is formerly the CEO of the South China Morning Post, which is one of the biggest newspapers really in Asia. And so he has had for the last decade a great vantage point of like what is happening, certainly among the elites, but like in general, keeping his pulse on what is going on in Hong Kong and in Asia broadly with his role at South China Morning Post. Gary, welcome to Overpriced JPEGs. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on your podcast.
And I want to caveat for anybody who, frankly, if you're listening or you are watching this, I've had to caveat that I had to caveat last week's episode this way. I am recording a couple of episodes before I go off for my wedding and my mini moon after that. And of course, the way the world would have it, my like entire usual studio setup just completely imploded moments before I had to record 3 episodes of this podcast. So we're doing a little OPJ throwback. If you have been with me from the early days of this podcast, this setup might look normal to you, like me in my living room with a slightly jankier mic than I usually have. So if this sounds a little jankier, if this looks a little jankier, I'm so sorry. This is what we have to do sometimes in this world of at-home podcasting.
I love it. Let's go retro. And congratulations, by the way, Carly.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So Gary and I are going to get into a whole bunch of interesting topics today. I want to ground us in a little bit of the history of Hong Kong, what maybe we in the West, we in the United States misunderstand about Hong Kong, talk about their move to really becoming a more crypto-friendly jurisdiction, talk a bit about NFTs and will Hong Kong save our bags? I think that's really kind of the question of this episode is like Asia broadly, but again, not wanting to, paint all of Asia with one brush. So really talking about Hong Kong specifically, are they coming to save us all? I feel like that's a little bit the perspective we have these days in the US. And I want to get your take on all of that. But before we get into it, we do need to hear a word from our lovely sponsors who make this show possible. Please go show them some love. Y'all know the phrase, not your keys, not your crypto. Well, in a world where too many people have had to learn that the hard way, Overpriced JPEGs is proud to partner with Ledger, the world leader in critical digital asset security. Ledger's Nano S Plus and Nano X hardware wallets, paired with the Ledger Live app, Ledger's own software for setting up your Nano device and managing your crypto assets, is the easiest way to start your crypto journey while maintaining full control of your digital assets. You can use all your favorite dApps with Ledger Live, accessing 15 plus Web3 apps, including 1inch, Paraswap, Lido, and Zerion. So you can not only manage, but also grow your portfolio. And Ledger Live is available on mobile and desktop. Securing digital assets shouldn't be complicated. Ledger is as easy as it gets. Uncompromising security, effortless connectivity, full transparency, Ledger is your one-stop shop to trade and track crypto, grow your assets, and manage NFTs. Secure your future with Ledger. Visit shop.ledger.com today or check out the link in the show notes. I am so excited to announce that this year, Overpriced JPEGs has partnered with OPENSEA, the world's leading NFT marketplace, built for everyone, creators, collectors, noobs, and experts alike. I'm an OPENSEA user because they have the best selection of NFTs and a truly inclusive view of the ecosystem, supporting 8 chains and 8 global languages. I trust the systems they've put in place to keep the space safe, like copyright protection, malicious URL detection and removal, robust verification, and more. It's why they are the place to buy, sell, and create NFTs. That's right. You know OPENSEA, you use OPENSEA, but did you know that OPENSEA now has drops? New exclusive projects launch every week from top projects and creators, and you can check them out now using the link in the show notes. They also recently introduced self-serve drops, which is in beta, and allows creators to launch their projects right on OPENSEA. This drops product gives creators access to tools like rich storytelling drop pages, multi-chain support, and drop mechanic customization. The full launch for self-serve drops is coming this spring. So check out the upcoming drops on OPENSEA right now using the link in the show notes and own what moves you. You'll also be supporting the show in the process. Okay, Gary, let's start. I would love for you to just start by telling us some of the misperceptions you think the West has about Hong Kong. You grew up in the United States. You have your foot a little bit in both worlds. Like you know both cultures. what do you see, especially around crypto, around NFTs, perhaps, that you feel like, or just broadly, anything that ties to this conversation that you think we in the US and in the West broadly don't understand?
I will paint a broad with a broad brush here, and to be clear, I am also an observer of Hong Kong.
Yes.
By no means am I an expert on Hong Kong, either its history or its present. I've just been very lucky, as you said, to have a very unique vantage point over the course of the last 7 years on watching Hong Kong's latest cycle of development. So Hong Kong is an extremely complicated and extremely conflicted place, and it's always been like that. I know we don't want to get too much into history, but for the listeners, it is really important to remember that Hong Kong, over the course of the last 150, 160 years, has just been ruled by other people and not Hong Kongers, right? Not the people that actually live here and have for generations called this place home, right? From the mid-19th century in the 1840s, the Brits came and decided that the Victoria Harbour is the best place for their navy to recover and then launch their wars on, much of Asia from, and Hong Kong was annexed and for 150 years was under colonial British rule. And then in 1997, 25 years ago, nearly 26 now, Hong Kong was returned to Chinese rule. It was called the handover at that point. And then Hong Kong people have had to learn over the course of the last quarter century how to exist as a Chinese city, but one that has very, very unique characteristics. So it's a very conflicted and complicated place.
And that's a fraught relationship. The Hong Kong-China relationship is fraught, to say the least.
To say the least, but the reality is that Hong Kong has had a fraught relationship its entire existence. The Hong Kong people, we conveniently kind of forget, but the Hong Kong people were not fans of British colonial rule. Who would be, right? And so there's a lot of history there of the Hong Kong people. I mean, frankly, this city has never, and its people have never experienced democracy, ever. Right, so this misconception from other places around the world that Hong Kong has lost democracy because of what has happened in the last few years, I think it's a far too reductive simplification because the reality is that Hong Kong's first democratic election was in 1991 when the Brits already knew. They'd signed 7 years ago, they'd signed an agreement to say Hong Kong is going to go back to Chinese rule, and in 6 years it's going to go back. And in 1991, with them effectively with 2 feet out the door already, the Brits said, hey, guess what? We'll give you this little gift of democracy. And even then, the actual circle of people who could vote for legislative councillors was relatively small. And so Hong Kong in its history has never been a democratic city. So it has been complicated. And what complicates it even more is the fact that the Hong Kong people have a really, really strong sense of self. They call it the Lion Rock spirit, named after this beautiful mountain in Kowloon that you can see from much of the city that is shaped like a lion's head. And that is a character of resilience. And I think throughout this conversation, we're going to keep coming back to what resilience looks like. But that character is so headstrong. And yet that character has never been necessarily the defining and certainly not the governing spirit of the city. And that's where the conflict is. So it is not a simple place to describe. And saying that Hong Kong is quote unquote over because of what has happened in the last few years, it's fundamentally changed. But saying it's over means that you are ignoring the many, many, many cycles of conflict and then regrowth that Hong Kong has already gone through in its history.
So I'm so naive. I don't even know why why anybody would call it over. Why are people saying it's over? And what is that about?
That seems to be the narrative. So over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, there has been a pretty fundamental change in the city. So again, digging just briefly into history, 26 years ago when Hong Kong was handed back to China, China created this governing principle known as one country, two systems, okay, which has kind of become a meme of itself lately. But one country, two systems was an experiment where China said, yes, Hong Kong is now fully back under Chinese governance. However, it is going to be separate from the rest of the mainland. And it is going to govern itself largely with a large degree of autonomy. And that is exactly how Hong Kong is governed. Hong Kong has a different set of rules for almost everything, for the legal system, which is actually a common law system, right? That the entire Commonwealth, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, many, many countries around the world, is the exact same legal system with actually international judges sitting on what is effectively the Supreme Court of Hong Kong, independent. Finance system, which is completely separate from the mainland, including the currency. Hong Kong dollar is actually pegged to the US dollar, right? It has nothing to do with the renminbi, with the Chinese yuan. The education system, the immigration system, obviously press freedoms, technology. So the internet, as an example, in Hong Kong is completely open. There is no restriction on the internet. Whereas if you go 35 minutes north and you cross into Shenzhen, then suddenly you're behind the Great Chinese Firewall. And until quite recently, the governance of Hong Kong was incredibly separate. But over the course of the last few years, because of, in 2015, there was a color revolution here in Hong Kong that was about democracy, about one man, one vote, which, by the way, Hong Kong has never had. And then in 2019, there were these massive protests that the world saw, like parts of Hong Kong burned for months. And then in 2020, because of the protests as a reaction, Beijing imposed what is called the national security law on Hong Kong and fundamentally changed the governance system of Hong Kong. It's effectively apolitical now. There's no opposition voice. There's no opposition party. And so the Hong Kong chief executive is effectively now kind of a provincial leader. So that governance system has changed. There are the margins of freedoms that have tightened around Hong Kong because of that. Now, because of those changes, a lot of observers, and I think the majority of global press, have painted the future of Hong Kong as bleak. And it's understandable why that it's been painted as such. But as someone, again, an observer that is not from here, but I've been fortunate enough to live through all of that, and I continue to live and work here. I think what we see on the ground is different, right? Yes, things have fundamentally changed, but the future is still wide open. And yes, the margins of freedoms have tightened, and of course, that's not good, but there is still a lot of freedoms in Hong Kong. It's still very different from the mainland.
Well, and crypto is a perfect example because you obviously see a certain amount of opening to the idea of blockchain within China, and you had the Beijing white paper, but certainly still a very restrictive crypto environment in China. Whereas you have Hong Kong clearly loosening, clearly signaling that they want to be a crypto hub. You have Hong Kong opening up to retail traders, which we'll get to. That's sort of the biggest, most recent news that happened this month. You had a couple different companies get licenses to offer crypto to retailers. So it's the perfect example of there's this distinction that I think, if you're in the West, it's hard to wrap your head around. So maybe in the crypto context specifically, why does the CCP let Hong Kong have the freedoms that they do let it have? It's almost like the tightening on the margins is what isn't surprising to me. It is the remainder of these freedoms that feels like it is surprising. Even just the fact that you have internet and you're 25 minutes away, or full unrestricted internet. Why is that? And in the crypto context,
the latter part of the question is a little bit harder to answer. Partially, it was because it was promised that Hong Kong would be this second system. But I think it's also because Beijing recognizes that China, this massive country with 1.4 billion population and the second largest GDP in the world, China needs an international city, a truly international city that can connect the Chinese system to the rest of the world. Hong Kong has been that for much of its history. Even under colonial rule, it was an entreport into a very complicated China. And certainly over the course of the last 26 years, as a Chinese-ruled city, it has been the gateway into this massive developing economy. But it's not just the gateway in anymore. It is the gateway out. And for the value that is being created in the massive Chinese domestic economy, even through this deflationary period, I know Chinese economy is all over the place right now, but the value that is being created, for it to be actualized, it needs to connect to the international market, and Hong Kong is the place through which that connection can happen in a relatively controlled and predictable way. So if Hong Kong were to become just another Chinese city and lose these freedoms, lose connection to the rest of the world, no longer be an international city, China as a whole suffers. And I think Beijing is well aware of that. I think that is the reason why Hong Kong has remained the way it is. And that philosophy absolutely applies to crypto. So as you said, China is anti-crypto. But oddly enough, it is not anti-blockchain. In fact, it is incredibly pro-blockchain. And I know in the rest of the world, those two things cannot coexist. You cannot have blockchain without crypto. And yet in China, that has happened. That's what exists, cryptoless blockchain, which at some point we can get to later, but it's just
what is that's just a ledger?
It is a ledger.
What is that?
Yes, that's right. It is a universal
just
ledger.
Just a centralized ledger.
Well, it is technically decentralized. As in, the nodes of this ledger are run by a bunch of different institutions, and it's not a single company, it's not a single individual, it's not a single entity that controls these nodes. So it's technically decentralized. However,
who selects the entities?
That's exactly right. However, these entities eventually, when you go up the chain, are controlled by the party. Right? This is as far as we know it. And the reality is that the blockchain ecosystem in China is still relatively opaque. And so it's really hard to know for sure how it operates when we're not there. And even though, we're very, very close, I'm still not technically there, right? Because I'm in Hong Kong, I'm outside of the mainland. But for now, this decentralized network of nodes and this blockchain ecosystem is flourishing. Billions of dollars have been poured into the development of this technology because it is now part of the national agenda in China to develop blockchain. In 2019, Xi Jinping said that blockchain is a national agenda. It is cutting-edge technology that China must develop. And it makes a lot of sense because blockchain makes sense for logistics. Blockchains make sense for security. Blockchain makes sense for developing a new type of digital economy. And China needs all three of those things. China is a massive country with a massive population. And what people don't understand is that it is so incredibly spread out, the population, that normal technologies, it just doesn't create the efficiency that is required to govern a country the size of China and with the complexity of China. And blockchain, I think Beijing sees as a technology that allows for more efficient and effective governance, but also allows them to build a new additive economy, which China desperately needs right now. So that's why there's so much being poured in. But you're right, it doesn't have the crypto incentive layer that keeps it truly decentralized.
Right. You don't, and it sounds like, I mean, I don't know, like, can you just volunteer to say, I'll run a node and be anybody? It seems like you probably have to be vetted through the party, and then you're in a very questionable territory as to how decentralized you can call something that's fundamentally all of the nodes are at the whim of the CCP. But I understand the point too. Like, clearly it's also not nothing. This is something when we talk about misconceptions of the West, there's this idea that I've had and that I've felt from other people, which is almost that China and maybe Hong Kong in particular have started this opening towards blockchain, let's call it. Again, Beijing had its white paper where it didn't actually specifically reference any cryptos in particular, but it was certainly positive on blockchains. That's the national agenda. Sure. You mentioned that. Hong Kong, obviously, absolutely opening to crypto. That this is a reaction to the West cracking down, and that there's this sense that there's this opportunity to step in since our regulatory environment is looking very anti-crypto. How much truth do you think there is to this sense that this is a reaction to what we're doing in the United States?
Yeah, I don't think that's true at all.
Interesting.
Yes. So a couple of points of context. The first is that Hong Kong is one of the top 5 capital markets in the world, and it is still remains the financial capital for Asia. And its regulatory framework in Hong Kong is extremely strict. It's very, very well managed, and it largely follows step by step American regulation because it is a truly global financial hub. Hong Kong got burned by Lehman as well in 2007, 2008. It became far more stringent in its security regulations. So the Hong Kong's version of the SEC is called the SFC. And it's again, largely followed American regulation, been in lockstep because these two worlds have to be able to coexist, right? And there's so much capital flow in between these two worlds anyway. So it is actually very unlike Hong Kong to take an alternate step when it comes to regulation versus the United States. And that was not by design in this case. What happened in Hong Kong was really interesting, and the history is actually only a few years. Hong Kong was early when it comes to being part of crypto, partially because so much of the early mining activity was happening in mainland China because of cheap electricity, cheap components and whatnot, and there was so much mining. I mean, at some point, I think 90% of all Bitcoin mining was happening in mainland China. And there had to be a way for that money to get out, to, again, become actualized into real value. And Hong Kong became the port through which that money became actualized. That, by the way, was part of the reason why Beijing eventually cracked down on crypto, was because so much capital was flowing out of China, and that was a national security risk for China, or at least Beijing deemed it to be such. And so Hong Kong, early on, started having loads of money to invest into blockchain technologies and crypto infrastructure. And at one point, 4 of the top 6 exchanges, and I think it was like 10 of the top 20, something like that, were either founded or domiciled in this city.
FTX.
I mean, so many. Binance was domiciled here. Huobi was domiciled here. FTX, AAX, they're just, I mean, BitMEX, so many were here. The Hong Kong government decided at one point, relatively arbitrarily, that it was not a good thing for the city. And the regulator effectively said, we are never going to give you a path to retail, which is a death knell for these exchanges. And so in around 2019, right before COVID, these exchanges started to leave. We had all of the talent, all of the money, right? And it left. And the city is not big. It's 7.5 million people. And so the amount of capital and talent that these exchanges had already brought in a very short amount of time was significant, and it all just left. And most of it went to Singapore. Eventually, some of them decamped to Dubai. Obviously, the Bahamas got FTX. Everyone has got a BVI company, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And I think through COVID, the Hong Kong government, I'm not, I don't know this for sure, but this is as an observer what I saw. The Hong Kong government realized that other cities were taking advantage of this new economy that was inevitable, and Hong Kong had lost out. And so I think that with a new government, because in 2022, last year in July, there was a government changeover. So a new chief executive, largely a new cabinet of ministers, and a new government came in on July 1st, 2022, and they decided to change the policies. There is now a new regulator. So as in the head of the SFC, the securities regulator, is more pro-crypto. And since last year when the government changed over, there has been this 180-degree shift. And I think it's because they saw the lost opportunity and they realized the window was still open for Hong Kong to once again become important in the crypto Web3 world. And they wanted to give it a very real shot. It was not a reaction to what is now going on in the United States. These decisions were made really before Gary Gensler's all-out war on crypto.
Yeah. Do you think the other story that I've heard around this is looking at things like FTX and saying, okay, we pushed these exchanges out. Yeah, you had something like an FTX that was in Hong Kong that, who knows, you can't play these counterfactuals, but perhaps had Hong Kong found a regulatory path for compliance or for staying there, maybe FTX would have stayed there and had to comply with rules. Who knows? They may have left anyways. But this narrative I'm hearing is one that many of us who are pro-crypto in the United States are pushing, which is if you don't create clear rules here, they will go offshore, they will go elsewhere, and they will be even riskier. And that there's a looking at FTX, because some of this stuff did start to get announced out of Hong Kong not too long after FTX, which feels kind of paradoxical. You think, oh no, everybody starts cracking down after FTX. But the logical response, which is what people are attributing to Hong Kong, is like, okay, you know what? Let's create a framework, bring the talent back here, but then regulate it. Do you think there's an element of that happening?
I think absolutely. Although I think we should be careful about giving too much credit on timing.
Okay.
So here's actually how the timing went. One of the most important events conferences that happens in Hong Kong every single year for the last 8-9 years is the Hong Kong FinTech Week. And this is a huge event because obviously Hong Kong being a financial capital of the world, all the banks are here. Most of the world's fintech comes into Hong Kong for these conferences. And post-COVID, the first real one was last year in October of 2022. And it was, I think, on October 31st or something like that, where FinTech Week opened. And the keynote, after the financial secretary of Hong Kong got on stage and said, hey, we're pro Web3 now. The keynote right after him was SBF. He was on screen from the Bahamas. And he was like the, golden child. And everyone was like, oh, this is the prodigal son returning to Hong Kong. He gave a glowing account of what Hong Kong, if it found a path towards retail, would become. And everyone applauded it. The Bahamas securities regulator was like a VIP at that fintech conference last year in Hong Kong. And then 4 days later, the world collapsed. So here's the thing. Hong Kong made those announcements about where the regulation was going to go before the FTX crash. I honestly think had they waited a week, it would never have happened. I think that because they announced it before this all went down, they kind of said, gosh, now we need to like continue down this path because we already announced it. And then we're going to reframe it as, hey, this is why we need regulation. And I think the smart thing is that from the get-go, Hong Kong's description of their regulatory philosophy has been 2 C's, clear and consistent, right? They've promised that their regulation is going to provide clarity and consistency, right?
Oh, I'm so jealous.
I know.
What I wouldn't give for clear and consistent regulation here in the U.S.
That's what we are benefiting from right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So, we're jumping around here a little bit. The top line, which I've sort of given folks, is that I think starting in August, I think it was earlier this month, basically, you had these 2 companies. I'm going to get the names wrong here, but you can maybe give them to me. I have them written down somewhere here. But the idea is that they have...
OSL was the first.
Yes. Okay. And Hashkey, I think, is the other one. They have gotten licenses now. Hong Kong has opened up this path to retail, saying, okay, retailers can now trade in crypto. But if you want to be a company that is an exchange for retailers, you have to get a license from us. And there's been some criticism there saying that, it costs $12 to $20 million to get a license because of all the hoops you have to jump through in order to comply. But whatever, there's a path there. And you have two companies that have first now gotten these licenses and have opened up now to trading for retailers. So this opens up this question of like, is Hong Kong going to come in and save the crypto markets? But I want to talk about NFTs in this context as well. So this is where I'm jumping around a little bit. So I almost want to jump to the consumer in Hong Kong. We've talked a little bit about the culture here.
Yeah.
We think of Asia as the luxury market in the world, which I think it is, right? A lot of luxury buying happens in Asia. I'm curious about Hong Kong specifically. Does it follow that pattern? Is there a huge kind of luxury social signaling market that exists within Hong Kong? Its GDP or its GNI, I think its income per capita is pretty equivalent to the United States. Like, what are spending habits like among people in Hong Kong?
Well, Hong Kong was Asia's first true luxury market. And it remained one of Asia's most important and largest luxury markets for many, many years. I don't necessarily think Hong Kong still can claim that crown. And I'll explain why in a second. But I do think that social signaling of owning luxury goods still does exist in the city. And part of it is that the city is one of the densest places on earth. And this, by the way, is personal opinion. Okay, this is personal opinion. Don't take this as an academia. But what I've seen is that because of the fact that Hong Kong is a small place, living situation is tight even for the rich, right? Like unless you're ultra rich, you are living in a 2,000 square foot apartment. Just happens to be in a really, really nice neighborhood with a really nice view. But it's a 2,000 square foot apartment. And these are people who are worth $100 million, right? Like And so the signaling that we often see in like the United States as an example, I grew up in New Jersey. The signaling of wealth in New Jersey is that you have this giant mansion, you have several really nice cars, and the swimming pool, everything, right?
Right.
You don't have that opportunity here in Hong Kong. Right? Yeah, you have cars, but I mean, you get driven around in an Alphard effectively if you're wealthy, which is a big black nondescript van that's made by Toyota, which no one in the West knows, but in Hong Kong is like the utmost luxury, right? And then so when you signal wealth, you signal in different ways, and you buy a lot of luxury goods, and you drip in brands. And then you spend a huge amount at fancy hotels for Michelin-starred meals and all of that stuff. That's what signaling of wealth looks like. It's not what we normally see as signaling of wealth in the U.S. So Hong Kong was the earliest luxury market, partially because of that. There's obviously a lot of money in real estate, and it is being spent. I mean, so much money being spent on luxury goods. But it then got driven over the course of the last 20 years up even higher to ridiculous degrees because mainland Chinese, nouveau riche from mainland China started coming across the border and buying up all of the luxury goods in Hong Kong because those brands didn't exist in China yet. Or at least they didn't exist in the volume. And more importantly, they were taxed at a completely different level in China. So it was always like 20, 30, 40% more expensive in China to buy these luxury goods. So they would come to Hong Kong, they would go into Hermes, and they would buy everything. So for a long time, Hong Kong remained one of the most important cities in the world to Richemont, LVMH, all the luxury groups, and all the watch groups. I mean, they're selling watches. The majority of luxury watches in the world at one point was sold through Hong Kong. But that's changed because now every major city in China, tier 1, tier 2, even tier 3 cities are packed with luxury stores. And the volume of sales in the Chinese luxury stores now are multiples of those in Hong Kong. And China has become, for the luxury world, the most important marketplace for consumption. So Hong Kong has lost that luster. Hong Kong people are still buying, but it's no longer at the same volume. But that culture still exists.
Let me introduce you to a brand new company that I could not be more excited about, Web3 Sense. A Web3 analytics platform that combines on-chain data with social media insights to give you the deepest, most meaningful intelligence into any NFT community. I have tested other analytics platforms out there, but Web3 Sense has the most comprehensive capabilities I've seen in the NFT ecosystem. They apply sophisticated data science to wallet histories to determine behavioral patterns and help shape predictive analytics. In other words, they can tell you which Twitter accounts are actually the influencers in your space. And they can tell you what resonates most within a community by looking at what other communities token holders are involved in. The number of use cases here is virtually unlimited. So whether you're a trader, creator, institution, brand, agency, I promise Web3 Sense has data that you want to see with the deep and actionable insights that you need to build, analyze, grow, start, whatever you want to do within the NFT space and in terms of building a business and a community. Now, they are still in very early days, so they're eager to connect with the community. So if you're interested in learning more about what Web3 Sense can do for you and your business, and you should be, go and fill out the very short form linked to in the show notes, and someone from their team will reach out with more information and an opportunity for a product demo. Trust me, you won't regret it. What is the feeling for the consumer? And this is obviously such a hard question to answer, but I'm going to throw it at you anyway. But what is the impression of crypto? And maybe even specifically, because when we talk about luxury good buying, I'm thinking about NFTs within Hong Kong.
So I realized that was where you were going to land, and I did not land there for you, so I apologize.
No, this is perfect. Give me an excuse to tee it up. You know, I look like a good interviewer.
No, you are a great interviewer. So
thank you.
The general perception of crypto in Hong Kong is relatively positive because Hong Kong hasn't been hit by a Mt. Gox. Hong Kong was not.
They all left before they had the chance, you know?
It was not the epicenter of FTX, right?
Right.
And because of the regulation here, the majority of retail investors in Hong Kong were largely protected over the course of the last few years of the ups and downs. So overall, and I think it's because crypto and NFT penetration in Hong Kong is still relatively low. But because of that, I think in general, there was at least apathy towards it. And then when the Hong Kong government came out and said, this is the future for Hong Kong, because the Hong Kong government has explicitly said Web3 and virtual assets are the future for Hong Kong. Part of the now city's governance agenda, top 3 things for the government to focus on over the course of the next few years. Because of that, I think generally there's a very positive vibe around Hong Kong. Oh, this is our future. Okay, I'm going to pay attention to it. For NFTs in particular, this is probably something that might shock many of your listeners. Hong Kong is a city of true whales. The NFT collecting communities in Hong Kong have been degens for a very, very long time. They are true OGs in the NFT world. And there's so much ownership of NFTs for a city of only 7 million people. Of the sort of the blue chip, the top 10 collections, so much of that ownership is concentrated in Hong Kong. So much more than even those companies were aware of until quite recently. The ape community in Hong Kong, as an example, is extraordinarily active. This is one of the reasons why Ape Fest is coming to Hong Kong. That wasn't by coincidence.
I was going to ask about that. Yeah.
Yeah, Yuga didn't just choose a city that they wanted to party in. It's because there's so much concentration of ape ownership and ape activity in the city that they were like, gosh, we got to be there. And then since they announced several other major blue chip NFT collections, and I can't name them because this was all confidential information that these teams share with me, have looked at their ownership, and found
distribution.
Oh my! It's not just it's concentration in Hong Kong.
Concentration in Hong Kong.
They're shocked by the whales. They're shocked by the ownership. They're shocked by the activity in Hong Kong. And these are quiet owners. Some of them are just like degens who got in early and have done a great job trading. But then there's also traditional capital, people who made a crap ton of money in finance and real estate and whatever else, putting their money and buying up these very, very expensive NFTs. And yeah, their bags have gone down massively in value, but they're hodling, and they're here. And so Hong Kong is actually really important, much more important than people gave it credit for in the NFT world.
Wow. So you're saying they are coming to save us? If the guiding question is Hong Kong coming to save our bags? What's the line? Is it Dumb and Dumber? That's like, so you're saying there's a chance,
Yeah.
No, that's really interesting.
Is that really the perception that Asia or some city in Asia like Hong Kong is going to be the silver bullet for all of this and is coming to save
yeah, I kind of think so. I would say, there's nuance to everything. And I don't think it's just NFTs in general. I think as things were getting bad regulatorily here, as prices were going down, there was definitely this feeling that the bright spot is Asia. And if Asia gets deeper into this and if things loosen there, money floods in, that could be the thing that could save us. So there is definitely an element to it that is for sure true.
Okay, so let me unpack that a little bit. So I certainly would not say that Asia is coming to save Web3, crypto, the NFT world. Okay? At least not that bluntly. Here's what I would say. Asia has the ingredients, and especially Hong Kong. Let's talk about Hong Kong in particular. Hong Kong has the ingredients to become an ever more important center for Web3 and decentralized technology innovation on behalf of the world, right? It has the capital. It now has the regulation. It really has access to the engineers, not only here in Hong Kong, but in particular, the engineers in mainland China that are incredible and are already building a lot on blockchain, as well as engineers all across Southeast Asia that would love to work for a Hong Kong-based company, right? So it has access to the talent. And it has access to the industries where the deployment of decentralized technologies makes the most sense early on. Obviously, financial services, logistics, arts, and culture. Okay, those are all core to Hong Kong economy. And now it has a government policy to say, hey, let's invest in this as a city. So it has the ingredients. And I do think that Hong Kong is a pragmatic city and is going to start building the infrastructure necessary to help Web3 scale. So we're talking about the on-ramps and off-ramps. Mm-hmm. We're talking about custody solutions that make it much easier for the Joe Schmo to get involved. We're talking about the global brands that have their Asia headquarters, right, in and around Hong Kong, who are allowed to experiment in a way that headquarters in Paris or New York or in London may not be able to. And so for all of these reasons, I think that we're going to start to see scale develop in Asia first, partially because of what is being built in Hong Kong and what is being regulated in Hong Kong, and how much easier that Hong Kong infrastructure and really the Hong Kong entrepreneurs are going to make it to enter into Web3 and to the crypto world. But also partially because there is a lot of developing economy population around Asia that desperately needs a decentralized economy and will jump at the chance to participate.
So that's all really interesting. But let me submit this to you, which is that I'm pretty confident in the tech getting where it needs to go. When you talk about on-ramps and off-ramps, whether that's happening in Asia or happening here in the States, I just had Jesse Pollack, who's the creator of Base, the Coinbase's layer 2. And through that conversation and others, I feel really confident in over the next 6 to 12 months, the technological barriers, we're in that last 10 to 20% phase, right? Where we need things to get 10 to 20% better on the tech side to really make this a much more seamless experience for consumers. So the bigger challenge to me is, how do you get consumers to care about digital goods? Because they'll get there eventually. But what's the short term? And, people who listen to the show regularly know my latest bet. It used to be ticketing back in the early days when I was a naive girl in the bull market. But now I'm saying I do think it's probably a digital physical, it's like a digital twin thing where folks buy physical goods, they get the digital twin. Once you have enough Gen Z people who have digital twins, they start going, well, I want a way to show this off. I want people on the internet to see what I own. And suddenly that starts to kind of develop it. But the reason Asia is almost interesting to me, and this could be totally naive, but what you said about folks in Hong Kong, there being a lot of whales, sort of feels like it validates it to me, is a consumer that's even more ready than maybe the West, or a higher percentage of consumers in Asia that are ready relative to the West to accept and buy digital goods as something that is desirable. What do you make of that? Because that would be more exciting to me, even than the tech, can you build it piece.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I think that my reaction to what you said is generally, I think, yep, she's on the right track. I think that sounds right to me as well. But I think that there are two ends of this spectrum that we should pay closer attention to in Asia. The first is, let's talk about this concept of a digital twin. I actually don't think it's going to be like buying an Hermes bag, buying a Birkin, and then having an official Hermes digital twin so you can show off that I own a Birkin, or whatever junk people spend their money on these days. Sorry, I did not mean to say Birkins are junk to anyone who owns Birkins,
if you any Birkin wearer listeners, we just shaded you.
Yeah. I don't think it's really that. I think that you have to go. I think that when it comes to real world asset tokenization, Asia is going to lead in this world. I think that it is going to be the tokenization of things like art, property, that creates greater liquidity and investment opportunity for people who want to participate in these investment markets, in these alternative assets that otherwise you would never be able to participate in, because I don't have $1 million to drop on a painting, right, or an apartment. I think that's where Asia is going to lead. And so the digital twin part is really actually RWA tokenization. There are aggressive efforts across several Asian jurisdictions, including in Hong Kong, to put the right regulation in place for STOs, right? And Hong Kong, Hong Kong has a regulated STO marketplace, so you can actually tokenize real world assets today and sell them to everyone in Hong Kong.
What is an STO?
A securitized token offering, right? So it's a security token.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that's legal. And STOs have been issued in Hong Kong. In fact, the Hong Kong government themselves issued an STO for green bonds, right? Took bonds that the government issued and turned them into tokens that professional investors could buy and hold. And it's coming to the retail market. And so, yes, there are other companies around the world that are tokenizing art, like fractionalizing an actual piece of physical, famous, expensive art and selling tokens of it. But I think that the scale play for that market, I think, will develop in Asia earlier than anywhere else in the world. So I think that when it comes to digital twin, look at real world asset tokenization in Asia. Yeah. On the other side of the spectrum, I think what we have to pay attention to is the developing markets, right? In Southeast Asia, whether it's Indonesia or Vietnam or the Philippines or India, so Southeast Asia and South Asia, because you do have this very, very, very large population of the what we would traditionally call unbanked, right? But unbanked is like, again, a very derivative way to talk about, a reductive way to talk about this. But people who are not deeply connected to the existing financial infrastructure of the world, where digital assets make a lot of sense. This is one of the reasons why fintech has exploded in Asia, including in mainland China, because so few people had traditional banks. It was very easy for them to jump onto, right, PayTM, and jump onto the Grab ecosystem, right, and the Gojek ecosystem as their digital bank, as their digital wallet. And so for the same reason, adoption of non-custodial wallets and actual on-chain virtual assets is going to come, I think, again at scale for this developing market population.
Yeah.
And it's just the on-ramps and off-ramps need to be there, right? They have to be able to spend this money once they get it. So I think you are right that we are probably, maybe I'm less optimistic than you are. I don't think it's 6 to 12 months. I think maybe 2 to 3 years away from this.
Okay.
But once it hits, Southeast Asia, South Asia, it is going to, grow massively in scale of people unique people who own wallets, who have DIDs, who hold digital assets. So those two spectrums, real world asset tokenization of luxury, of expensive real world goods or real world assets, and the adoption of crypto assets for the unbanked is going to be very interesting to watch in Asia.
Well, what you didn't even touch on in there is the gaming side of this, which obviously you saw Malaysia and Indonesia and these countries getting in on Axie and forgetting even, the success or failure of Axie. But, where the gaming piece ties in for me as well is the appreciation I've gained for the fact that Western gaming is not necessarily global gaming. And when you look at mobile gaming or free to play to some extent, but really I think mobile gaming, like the kinds of games that are really popular in Asia are quite different than what's popular in the United States, for example. And some of the stuff that's popular in Asia, we would look at in the US and be like, what? Like who would play this or who would want this? And so I'm bringing a little bit of that perspective to fuel my own hopium when it comes to like, Asia being the Asian consumer, or again, we're talking about Hong Kong specifically, but now I am painting this broader brush of like being open to spend money on different things than maybe the U.S. consumer immediately understands or wants to spend their money on. Let me ask you about a couple other obstacles though, and this will get us into something you were referencing earlier around just the struggle with the Chinese economy and will Asia save us? Well, I don't know. They seem to be a little bit on the ropes. You all seem to be a little bit on the ropes as well economically. And so there's the broader economic conversation, which I want to have in just a moment. But then I was also reading something that, yes, fantastic. Regulatorily, things are opening up. There's a path to retail traders. But there's actually a lot of banks in Hong Kong that are, much like in the United States, are still very hesitant to take on companies that are crypto companies. Do you know anything about this? Like, what are you seeing in terms of like the infrastructure and the ancillary businesses that would maybe spring up to support a crypto economy? Is that still a struggle?
That is true. That is still a struggle. I've started 2 Web3 companies in the last 2 years, and this Web3 association. And it's been hard for all of these companies to get bank accounts. It's just taken a long time, and everyone struggles with this. It's primarily because of KYC AML, right? Banks in Asia and banks in Hong Kong, just like in every major capital market, needs to be sure that if they open an account for an individual or a company, that when that account is funded, the money is not coming from shady places. It's not coming from illicit activity. It's obviously not coming from terrorism, terrorist organizations, and whatnot. And with crypto, it's really hard to tell. It's just really hard, right? First of all, because of crypto, you have these individuals that are unknown individuals that have never had any kind of financial record to say, this person is making a lot of money. Suddenly come to a bank and be like, hey, I got a couple $1 million of fiat that I want to put in the bank account. And the bank's going to be like, WT, what do I do with this, right? And the same with companies springing out of absolutely nowhere with directors that no one has ever heard of before that have millions of dollars of assets. And so the big issue, and I spend a lot of time talking to banks about this in Hong Kong, the big issue is the amount of time it takes to KYC and AML. And there is no good system. There are no good controls. There are no good tools for these companies to do that. They literally like have entire teams of analysts and investigators that are digging into these individuals, that are calling, like, it's so freaking manual right now.
Yeah. So it's not that they don't want to. It's not that they're hesitant about crypto or that they don't believe in crypto. It's quite literally a logistical, tactical problem and not an interest problem or like a philosophical problem.
I think initially it started off with we're not interested because, especially in Hong Kong, Beijing said that this is bad. So unless Beijing doesn't say it's bad, unless Beijing says it's good, we're not going to do it. Right. And so that was the original problem. Since Beijing effectively gave the green light and Hong Kong has said, hey, we're going to do this, the Hong Kong banks, especially the big ones, and I'm talking about global banks that are, Asia headquartered here, HSBC, Bank of China, Standard Chartered, right? Citigroup has huge operations here. Bank of America has a big operation in Hong Kong. These banks are starting to be like, okay, we're open up, but now it's logistical. So I think that there has to be evolution of KYC AML guidelines, and there have to be tools that are being built to help these banks open up faster. Digital banks are doing a little bit better of a better job. They're a little bit faster because they're willing to take on more risk, but it still takes several months.
Along these same lines, like, what is the venture capital markets like in Hong Kong? And has there been now a surge of investment in Hong Kong-based, whether it's exchanges or companies or like companies operating in the crypto realm within Hong Kong since you've seen this more positive language come out?
Not yet.
That's so interesting.
It's still a little bit of a wait and see moment for investors. Hong Kong, like I mentioned several times, Hong Kong is a city of a massive amount of capital, just ridiculous wealth. And so there's a lot of venture capital and a lot of PE capital that is custodized here in Hong Kong, that's based here. But historically, its investment opportunity has always been outside of Hong Kong. So the money that is based in Hong Kong, a lot of it gets invested into mainland China, Southeast Asia, and then actually increasingly there's a lot of Hong Kong dollars that is being invested in the United States because now you can't invest directly, right? And so the Hong Kong ecosystem of builders and entrepreneurs have never really been able to take advantage of the capital flow here. But what we have seen over the last couple of years is that more and more traditional investors in Hong Kong are segmenting out part of their reserves and putting it into crypto assets in preparation, right? So this is learning in preparation for investing into decentralized infrastructure. And I actually think that is where a lot of the investment is going to go over the course of the next few years here in Hong Kong, is that folks are going to build enterprise solutions that are going to build the rails and the roads for Web3 scale. And that's where the Hong Kong dollars, VC dollars, PE dollars are going to be pumped into. Right? Is
there a robust VC community and market in Hong Kong, given what a big financial hub it is, I would assume, but I also know that the US is sort of distinct in terms of our VC culture.
There definitely is. It is different than Sand Hill, right? Sand Hill is always going to be Sand Hill. That's going to be the mothership. But here in Hong Kong, there are a lot of VCs with huge AUMs, huge. But most of their AUM is not in the city. I mean, Hong Kong is just a small place, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, historically, we haven't built global companies out of this city. But I think with Web3, there's a very real opportunity for Hong Kong-based Web3 companies to be global companies building global solutions, and that's where the venture capital will flow.
I had Ray Chan on the pod. He's, of course, 9gag CEO. He runs Memeland.
Yeah,
he's based
awesome.
in Hong Kong. He's amazing. And we had a fun conversation a little bit about the cultural differences between and I think he was probably speaking a little bit more about China perhaps, but kind of Asian VC and the US, and just the feeling that there's a lot more cutthroatness in Asia. There's a lot more sink or swim in the Asian entrepreneur culture versus in the United States, where we're almost so awash with capital that there's this kind of weird sense that you can just raise. We're almost less tough. I don't know that was the word he would use. I don't want to put that in his mouth, but that's sort of almost my takeaway is US entrepreneurs have just gotten soft because there's so much money, being thrown at us at any given time. What do you think about that?
I think he's largely right. I think that just the volume of competition in Asia, especially if you touch the China market, is so huge. The quality of talent, just the quantum of talent, is something that I think most entrepreneurs in the US could not wrap their heads around. The aggressiveness, the work hours, the just everything, right? That's supposed to drive building is just a different situation. I think Ray also, I mean, 9gag grew up in a period of time in Hong Kong where the couple of entrepreneurs that have really made it from their class, from that vintage, they bootstrapped for years and years and years, and all of them got close to death, at one point. Ray is very good friends with two other incredible Hong Kong entrepreneurs. One is named Wesley Ng, who is the founder of Casetify, the phone case company that is now worth $1 billion.
Yeah, I was seeing ads for it in the subway the other day, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, they're all over the place. Every celebrity in the world is carrying a Casetify case now. And another company that most Americans would not know called Day Day Cook, which is founded by this amazing female entrepreneur in Hong Kong named Norma. And they're all very close friends. And all of them are the same vintage, and they all bootstrapped. They were all close to death at one point, and they all had to just grind to get through because capital was not easy to get in Hong Kong. There's a lot of capital, but they were like, you know what? We bet on you early. We gave you a little bit. You have to figure it out. And once you become profitable, then we may give you more money. And all of them have made it. And so, I mean, I respect them to no end. They're incredible entrepreneurs. But that's okay. Back to our first point we made, that's the resilience of Hong Kong people.
Yes.
And that's what has always made Hong Kong great. And I think finally now that we found a tech sector where Hong Kong has all of the ingredients to be great for the world, which is Web3, that resilience is going to freaking really bear fruit. So that's why I'm so optimistic about people like Ray and the ecosystem here in the city.
Well, while we're on this and talking about Ray, the other thing that Ray said or sort of alluded to, I think in a totally humble way, was like this sense that people have maybe underestimated how advantageous it is for a project like Memeland to have its foot in both US NFT culture, but then also have a Hong Kong-based founder who understands Hong Kong culturally and arguably like, China culturally or like kind of broader Asia culturally. Do you think that's true? Like, is it smart to look at projects that can have appeal in both worlds, you think, moving forward?
Oh, that's a great question, Carly. So obviously it's always good, right, to look at projects that have global appeal. That's table stakes. I do think that it will be years before a project can truly penetrate both let's not call it East and West. Let's call it the open Web3 and China's version of Web3. Because it's just two completely different systems. And I think it will be years before a project can bridge the gap between those two. Whether it's a crypto project or an NFT project or even just an infrastructure project, I think it'll be years before anyone is even allowed to bridge those two worlds. So I don't think that is yet an advantage of having a foot in both worlds, because these two Web3s are going to develop quite independently of one another, and then eventually they're going to connect. And I do think they're going to connect in Hong Kong, which is why this city is really interesting. But it'll take years. I do think that the advantage of building outside of the United States is that we always think of American tech companies, and I grew up in American tech, so I am still prone to the thinking of American tech. We always think of ourselves as truly global companies. But what we forget is that we are not actually building for a global audience. We're building for an American audience, and it's just that American culture and American expectations is so prevalent everywhere else in the world. Building for an American audience allows you to become a global company. But I think that window of American exceptionalism is rapidly closing. And there are huge markets with much larger populations in the United States in aggregate are starting to say, hey, we have our own expectations, we have our culture, and we have our own needs. So we're going to care about projects that are built for us, not for them. And I think building outside of the United States gives you that perspective, whether it's in Hong Kong or in Singapore or in Jakarta or in Manila. It gives you that perspective, which I think gives you a better shot of truly creating a global business.
Yeah, what's so interesting about that and what resonates so much with that is like I talk about the nichification of the world and the nichification of the consumer as being one of the trends that's happening alongside NFTs, the creator economy, right? Like it's the fact that when I grew up, everybody I knew watched American Idol on Tuesday night. And now there's fewer and fewer shows that really cut across that everybody is watching at once, right? We're going into our silos. I'm watching this niche comedian or I'm listening to this specific set of podcasts. And it could be totally different from some of my best girlfriends who in some ways, demographically I'm the most similar to, but even within our world, we can find our own niches. So it's sort of silly to think that while that's happening all across all different kinds of consumer behaviors that's not going to happen globally. Like, of course that's going to happen everywhere globally and everybody's going to go more niche and that's country by country and city by city. And so that makes a lot of sense. As we wrap here, maybe last question or I may have a follow-up because I always do this. I always say it's going to be the last question. Then I have 6 follow-ups to somebody.
All good.
And I'm ending with like a huge one. But for folks who aren't tracking very closely what's happening in the Chinese economy, which frankly, like I haven't totally been, but I've seen some of these headlines. So I know Evergrande, a big real estate company based out of China, it's been struggling for a while, but it officially declared bankruptcy recently. Like it's struggling. What should folks make of this? And again, I keep thinking under this artifice of like, will Asia save Web3? Like, where do things stand right now economically within China, Hong Kong, and what do you think we can expect?
Within mainland China, the future is unclear. And this is really the first time in 30 years, maybe 40 years, where China's economy is not expected to consistently grow. And that has sent a shock through the global system quite recently. And I don't think we're going to get clarity anytime soon. However, if you were to ask long-term China observers, you're going to get 2 primary perspectives on this. One is, the observers that are truly pessimistic, they're like, China's always grown. And China's only been relevant because it's consistently grown. And for 30 years, it grew at like 10% every year, right? And that's why it was relevant to the rest of the world. The fact that China's no longer growing is going to absolutely dent and potentially fracture its relevance to the rest of the world. And they're very pessimistic. And then there's an entire group of people that really their voices are more sidelined and secondary in the Western world who say, okay, you got to understand the China system. And the China system, because it's authoritarian, means that the Chinese government can do what they need to do to make sure that the domestic market does what it needs to do, right? Mm-hmm. It's a silly sentence, but they can control the Chinese domestic market. They can, in other words, manipulate it. And at the end of the day, the party in China, their legitimacy is still tied to a population mandate. It is still tied to the fact that 1.4 billion people have to believe that the one-party system is good for the nation. Right? And so they have to make sure the domestic economy functions and the domestic economy works for the people. So they have many more levers to pull than the Federal Reserve in the United States or the Treasury Department. There are far more levers to pull. And so there is a group of China observers who say, don't ever bet against the Chinese domestic economy. Maybe you can say that China is going to be less relevant in a truly global economy, but don't bet against the Chinese domestic economy because the party needs it to work and they have all the levers that they need to make it work.
Can you give an example of some of those additional levers they have and maybe the ones that like we don't have, the Federal Reserve doesn't have?
They can arbitrarily change rules. They can very, very quickly decide where all national investment is going to go. They can manipulate the currency, right? Take blockchain as an example. China is split up into 27 different effectively regions, 23 provinces, and then like there's a bunch of different special administrative regions and stuff like that, autonomous regions and whatnot. And since China in 2019, 2020 decided that blockchain was going to be national agenda, 26 of those 27 regions in China have released their own kind of blockchain strategy. That's how fast they can move.
Right.
Is that one person says this is the national agenda, and then everyone falls in line. That's not how the United States works, right? The president can say, this is what the strategy for the country needs to be, or Congress can say, this is what we need to do, and then the states start fighting. Like, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that, and there's no cohesion. There's no standard setting. There is no really like fast national movement, but China has that. For all of its ills, China has that.
No,
So
look, authoritarianism
that's
has its clear advantages. I think one of the analogies I've heard, but maybe this falls in the camp of like that's that first category of people who are sort of more Western centric or you know, who have something to gain by being like, China's on its downswing is the comparison to Japan, who maybe didn't have as long of a run as China had, but certainly had its decade of crazy growth in the 80s where everyone said, oh my gosh, Japan's going to overtake the world. And then it didn't happen, right? And then it just sort of slowed and then had a bad period and it's just sort of now a world economy, but not like a major player or what the West would consider a threat. What do you make of that analogy?
I mean, I think it's just such a silly comparison, and it is a very Western point of view. It's like, oh, they're both in Asia, so let's compare them.
Yeah.
They're just fundamentally different economies, completely different cultures. Obviously, the period in which the hypergrowth came was different. The way in which that growth came was incredibly different. I mean, it's just it's not worth the comparison.
It's a bad analogy.
The only way that analogy is interesting is if you view America's reaction to it. That's where the analogy becomes interesting. Because the same people who actually created the American policies that maybe didn't crush by itself the Japanese economy eventually, but kind of ushered its way towards the stop of that ridiculous hypergrowth in Japan, they were the same people that were around Trump starting in 2017 to try and dictate China policy that would restrict China's growth. The same people came back 30 years later to try and contain another rising economic power for the benefit of American superiority. And so that's really the only place where that analogy, I think, really holds. It's in America's
That's a great point. That's a great point. All right, Gary. Well, this has been so much fun. I really appreciate how much knowledge you have and you giving us this insight into what's going on.
Question.
No. What was my question?
No, I couldn't tell you if Asia is coming to save the NFT world.
I know. But of course. But I think you gave a really good perspective. Like, I feel like I have a much better sense of the answer to that question. And here's how I would summarize it. I would say there are reasons that we are optimistic that are well-placed and valid, which is that you do have this luxury-oriented economy, though I understand how you described how it's changed, right? It's not the same kind of hub that it once was because you now have China as a huge luxury economy, but Korea, Japan are also both luxury markets in their own right. But it's definitely a luxury market. I'm leaving here still feeling like there's a real consumer appetite that may even be bigger than the US or Western consumer appetite for like a digital luxury good, partly based on how many whales are there. And none of that was dissuaded. You talk about the strong internet in Hong Kong. That makes me feel like you have this very tech savvy, financially savvy, literate place. Where we have overblown it is, I think, in maybe overestimating the economies themselves, a little bit in feeling like the energy around this is super competitive with the US. I almost see if it was super competitive with the US, if this was a reaction to the US, if this was a reaction to the West, I almost think that's more bullish. I think the fact that it's more independent and homegrown is actually less bullish in some ways, because I think it means like, you're not going to do something crazy to make the market work to capture share from the US. It means you're going to kind of do it more slowly or considered, and the opening that has happened around retail trading, I do think still comes with a lot of obstacles. The banking challenges we talked about, the regulatory obstacles are still very much there. Like I said, $13 million, $20 million to set up an exchange is not like something where you're going to have suddenly a crazy growth. The fact that you said the venture markets aren't super robust in terms of investing locally in Hong Kong in crypto is and into like NFTs is not as promising. So I think you provided that's my take. It's like there's a balance of things going on here, and that's usually a good sign that it's the truth, rather than all hype or all fun.
Yeah, I think you summarized it really well. I think if I were to leave the listeners with one final optimistic note, is that I really do believe Hong Kong and Asia as a whole is going to contribute to the onboarding of the next billion Web3 users. It's not necessarily going to be through PFPs. Well, actually, I can tell you that it's not going to be through PFPs or luxury NFTs or that. It's just going to be digital assets. It's going to be this transformation of what individual wealth and control of financial future looks like in a developing world. And it's going to be, we're going to onboard millions, hundreds of millions of people into a fully digital economy. That's where Asia is going to contribute. And when that happens, we can all assume that the rest of the marketplace, the head of the market that we generally play in, right? Those who are crypto traders, those who hold massive NFT bags, that everyone is going to benefit with hundreds of millions more users on board into a digital asset economy. So that's, I think, where everyone in the world needs to pay attention to that growth in Asia.
That's the note to end on. Look at you. You're a podcast master. You must have done this a lot. You're very good at navigating. You can host this show. Come on anytime,
No, please. No, I just followed your lead. Thank you, Carly. That was such a fun conversation.
So much fun, Gary. I really appreciate it. We will definitely have you back on as we track this and see where it all goes. And I'll see y'all next time. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Overpriced JPEGs. If you liked this conversation, if you liked this episode, please go ahead and hit subscribe. It helps me out, it helps the show out, and it means you will get alerts and updates when we post new content. Thanks again.